So let's take a little closer look at the teacher CD. You'll notice there's an activation code on the back of your CD case. Enter the code and you'll be taken to the main menu. The first section starts the DynaNotes Student Course Notes section views. On the left-hand side, you can see the different eras. So here's the Civil Rights Movements, 1960s in Vietnam. And when you scroll over a particular era, you'll see the different sections underneath each one. So if we want to go to the Vietnam War, we can click directly to that section, and then the section of content on the Vietnam War, the same section that's in the student course notes, comes up. Remember from the pacing chart that most whole group activities begin with reviewing the information in this section. And hopefully the teacher would take the time to more fully describe each of these items and their importance. Now, if you're in a section of content and you happen to see this red symbol and the words more, that means the section did not fit on one page. Simply click the More section to see the rest of the information that was presented. Not only can you use the More button, but you can also scroll through using the arrows. So this section of content is pretty simple. The course notes can also be used when you're reviewing the answer key and need to come back and show how helpful information was in the student course notes for that particular question. Let's go back to the home screen and see what else is in the program CD. The second button starts the DynaNotes computer games. Remember from the pacing chart that the computer games are typically assigned in the summary lesson or the last lesson of each time frame or era. So for example, 1898 to 1920, the Progressive Era and Rise of World Power, has a game called Bet, Answer, and Win. When you click into the game, you see an opportunity for your class to divide it into teams to take race relations for 200 and try to answer the question correctly. When you're done playing the game, you can head back home and go to the section of content that you need based on what's assigned in the pacing chart. One of the most important materials available on the CD is the answer key. So this is where we want to take a little more time and consider how to use this resource. The answer key opens as a PDF file, and this was intentionally done so that teachers could print out copies of the answer key and either use them to set up self-checking stations or to return them to students with their graded work. Also, students can use printed copies of the answer key pages for the activity they just completed to grade their own work or each other's work. The answer key looks exactly like the student activity book, even including the table of contents, except that the answers are indicated in red. For this pre-test, answers are just a circled letter, but normally, once we get past the pretest and the message to the student there, you'll see that answers are more detailed. In some cases, like the Color Cube project, which is very creative and students could go many different directions on this one, there's simply the information that the answers or the cube designs will vary. But in most cases, there's specific correct and incorrect answers. In this case, there's true, false information, and the student will either have a good explanation for what is actually true as opposed to the false statements, or they will not. And we certainly try to put as much information as possible in these answers so that students can see a whole answer and see if they got all of it or some of it. Often there will be a term bank, and so the exact answer should be found on the correct blank. Let's go to the last activity for the first lesson on growth in the Gilded Age, you will see one of the right to understand activities. The reason I want to stop and point out this particular activity is that the example given will of course not be anything like what your student has chosen to write about. But we really believe that especially for the first writing activity, you can help your students a lot by reading them or letting them read an example that someone else chose for their essay. So in this case, let's just read this activity. The Gilded Age was a time of transformative growth and change in the United States. Successful businessmen amassed power and astonishing fortunes. Corrupt governments persisted at all levels and supported business interests over the needs of workers and farmers. Millions of Americans, whose names are lost to history, reacted to the conditions around them by working long hours, migrating, dedicating themselves to causes, etc. Choose the type of everyday person you are, not a famous person, and your location. You could be a sharecropper in Georgia, a farmer in Kansas, a recent immigrant or middle-class woman in Chicago, etc. Research the people and place you have chosen to join. Write a letter describing your life and thoughts to someone far away. So this example, someone chose a 17-year-old male who is a Russian Jew, second generation, in New York City. Next, the instructions say, choose 3 terms that relate to your idea from the 1877 to 1898 Growth, Transformation, and Gilded Age, page 1, era of the DynaNotes U.S. History Student Course Notes and write them on the lines below. Persecution, public school, and fires is what this student is choosing to include. Write a short letter to your friend that uses each of the 3 terms. Circle the words wherever they appear. For a perfect score, your text must 1. Demonstrate that you understand each term. 2. Reinforce and not conflict with American history. And 3. Demonstrate good writing organization and mechanics, which includes grammar, capitalization, punctuation, and spelling. Also, you may want to inform your students that it is okay to suspend the reality that the type of person you chose may not have been able to read and write, for example, and also may have used very different dialect than the dialect we use today. But we want to make sure that the students' ideas of what it might be like for an everyday person during the Gilded Age are realistic. So this example could be read to your students before they begin their own activity. Dear David, I hope this post finds you well. There have been a few changes since my last letter. Mom and my oldest sister still work at the shirt factory. They get up in the dark and return home in the dark with little money to show for it. Dad still goes to the market each day with his push cart of pickles and such. He complains about it, but I think he enjoys haggling over prices in Yiddish with others his age. Since I learned English, reading, writing, geography, and arithmetic at the public school, I can get a better job than pushing a cart with Dad. But I can't complain to him about how hard it is to find good paying work. If I do, then I'm sure to hear about how things are not nearly as bad in the Lower East Side as they were in Russia. When he last mentioned the persecution Jews faced, crowds beating and burning even women and children, I almost brought up the deadly fires that break out from time to time in our crowded neighborhood, but I thought better of it. At least New York City fires and sicknesses do not discriminate among the poor by their religion. Enough with the rags, let's talk about the riches. I'm very excited to tell you that I might have the chance to work as an assistant to my old teacher's brother. He needs someone in his office who is fast with numbers, and she told him I could do the work for a lot less money than others would cost. I will shock him with my accuracy, speed, and willingness to work hard. If I can learn bookkeeping, then there will be even more opportunities for me in this city of endless industry. Your friend, Ben. You might be concerned as you look at some of the activities that significant research would be required by the students in order to correctly answer, and complete the different activities. For example, the speech that Teddy Roosevelt gave in 1911 at the University of California is not specifically something that they are responsible for. However, your students, given the 5 choices available, actually should be able to identify that this excerpt makes sense to have come from Teddy Roosevelt. If I had acted strictly according to precedent, I should have turned the whole matter over to Congress, in which case Congress would be ably debating it at this moment. And in portions of the public press, the debate still goes on as to whether or not I acted properly in taking the canal. But while the debate goes on, the canal does too, and they are welcome to debate me as long as they wish. Well, that sounds a lot like Teddy Roosevelt to me. He was an expansionist, and certainly expansionist ideas are in quotation number 1. Also, he was the leader in the activities that led to U.S. control and ability to build the Panama Canal. And certainly, some members of Congress opposed what he did. This information is enough information to identify Teddy Roosevelt as the speaker, given that the choices are Alfred T. Mahan, DeLong, Teddy Roosevelt, Senator Proctor, and Sanford B. Dole. There's one other thing I'd like to point out to you, and that is the variety of questions that are found in the program. After the pretest, which is STAR and EOC-like questions, you'll see that several activities don't look anything like STAR and EOC type questions, but they do involve a lot of the skills that the students will need to be successful. However, here in Activity 3, you can see that there are a few STAR-like questions. So, although there are no 100% STAR-like questions type activities, there are several of these types of questions that are sprinkled in for a specific reason. And that is to give the student experience with those types of questions while not boring them to tears by only giving them those types of questions. We hope we strike the right balance of variety and engaging activities while still building familiarity and stopping to check that students are comfortable with those approaches.